Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Rated bar! Top of the world!
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hi, Wendy here. Before we start off our episode today, I want to remind everybody to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Also, please leave a rating or comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media by simply searching Silver Screen Time Machine, and please make sure you follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review. Today we have a guest on our show. His name is Bryan. He's going to be helping us today. And you may have noticed when I said the name that I did not say Wendy and Kirk's Classic Film Review. Bryan, do you know why that is?
Because Kirk is no longer on the show?
Yes, unfortunately, Kirk has left us to pursue other interests. So as of now, it is now only just Wendy's Classic Film Review, but that's okay. We're going to have a lot of great people coming in, like Bryan, to talk about all your favorite classic films like we always do. Nothing's really going to change on the show. Just we're going to be without Kirk. We're just going to have other folks coming in to join us. So today we have Bryan. Bryan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Bryan McGeary. I'm wondering if you brought me on this one because it's about an Irish thing and so with a name like mine. But I am an academic librarian by trade. So I work for Penn State University, although my views on here do not represent that of my employer.
Yes, important to say, although I don't think our views are very controversial here on Silver Screen Time Machine. Yes, well, thank you for joining us, and I'm sure you have a great research background, so I'm sure you have a lot of great information about this film. And Bryan, you and I are both really big Carol Reed fans, and our film that we're going to be talking about today, as we're getting in our time machine, and we're going back to
1947.
And we're talking about
Odd Man Out.
Odd Man Out. This is a Carol Reed film, as I said. And like I said, we are big Carol Reed fans.
Yes.
I think that's sort of how we sort of bonded in the first place. We both really enjoy Carol Reed.
We have the same favorite film, which is Carol Reed.
What is it about Carol Reed that you particularly like?
I like I guess probably the thing that sticks out the most, although this isn't necessarily directly him, but his films always have great cinematography in them. Now, I think his films have a very gritty, earthy sort of feel to them that I just find very...
Yeah, at least his early British films. I think perhaps later on in his career he got away from that, unfortunately, which I think is unfortunate because I think it's the best stuff about his film. But let us talk a little bit about this particular film, Odd Man Out. 1947, this is a fairly early film for Carol Reed. This film is based on a novel by F.L. Green. As a matter of fact, I found it very interesting. We're going to have a lot of initials. Everybody seems to just have initials in this particular episode. But at least they don't have hard names to pronounce, so I guess that's good. So F.L. Green wrote this novel. It was in 1945, I believe, called Odd Man Out. It's sort of based on the IRA and the IRA doing terroristic things in Belfast specifically. This is specifically based in Belfast. And Carol Reed, he read this book and he was very interested in making this a film. And he had this thing where he liked his authors and his novelists to come on and do the screenplay because he didn't feel like there was a big pool of talented screenplay writers in Britain, unfortunately. He thought that America had a much better pool of screenplay writers than Britain. F.L. Green didn't really want to write the screenplay, but he kind of convinced him. And as a matter of fact, F.L. Green moved into Carol Reed's house and lived there for a month, and they would daily go over the screenplay, just updating the screenplay, seeing what dialogue they wanted to use from the book. And F.L. Green had this thing where he could only work with music on, so he had to bring his gramophone. And so Carol Reed, for one entire month, had to listen to this gramophone while they tried to work out the screenplay.
Do you know what they listened to?
I would hope he listened to a variety of songs. If he just listened to one song, that would be really, really mundane.
Yeah, I don't know if it was like you hear these stories about Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys listening to Be My Baby on repeat for like years at a time.
Yeah, I think if you're working with somebody else, it might be nice not to torture them with the same song over and over and over again. But unfortunately, it didn't say that particular information. But Carol Reed was very involved with production, the entire production from start to finish. I guess you could call him a control freak. He wanted to have his hand in every part of production, like from the screenplay to the final edit to the score to everything. He wanted to be involved, which I guess is a good thing. But he is producer and director of this particular film. Also, R.C. Sheriff, another initial. Sheriff, I assume, is the way you pronounce his name. Carol Reed brought him on to kind of help F.L. Green, because there's a big difference between writing a novel and writing a screenplay.
Yeah.
So he thought he needed some help. And R.C. Sheriff was kind of well known for writing Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which he was actually Oscar nominated for that film. The score is done by William Alwyn, who is somebody that Carol Reed worked with a lot, really liked him. He got to start doing war documentaries and propaganda films. I don't know. The score, to me, I don't notice it. I don't hear it. When I went to research about the score, I thought to myself, well, what did it sound like? I really didn't remember anything about it. So I find that, I don't know if that means that it was just very subtle, or I just ignored it because I didn't care for it, or it wasn't important enough to me. What are your thoughts on the score?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that, because William Alwyn had apparently been very fond of this score that he did. So the theme that he has for Johnny in this, he reused that in his first symphony that he created, like in the first movement of that. So apparently he thought it was good enough that he went back to that well at some point in the future. But I think probably part of the reason why that sort of doesn't jump out at you throughout the film is that he, especially with like Johnny's theme, he uses it sort of very sparingly. It comes out at the points where, so throughout this film, Johnny kind of has these moments where he has sort of a brief respite from all of the chaos that's going around and from the people that are pursuing him. And then whenever the moments happen where he's then kind of back out on the street trying to sort of fend for himself, that's when the theme comes in. And so I think because of the fact that the theme only happens at certain moments like that, you tend to not notice it as much.
Yeah, and Carol Reed, he was very obsessed with realism, especially at this point. Realism was a big movement at this point after the war, especially in British filmmaking. There was a big movement towards realism and stuff like that. He wanted to be very realistic. He wanted people in Ireland to feel like this was a very realistic film. So he used, I think, a lot of sounds that you would have around if you were running around the street and stuff. And I'm thinking about when they jump over the fence and they run into that garbage can, and that garbage can lid is dinging around.
Yeah.
I think they had a lot of stuff like the barking dog. I feel like there's a lot of stuff like that, just street sounds, I guess is what you would say, to create realism in that. So maybe that's why the score gets a little bit lost.
And he used actual sounds in the film too, instead of like canned sound effects, which would have been typical for that.
Yeah, he didn't use
period.
stock sounds. Yeah, he was very particular about that. But I think the best thing about this particular film, in my opinion, is the cinematography and the cinematographer.
Before we move on to that, one thing I did want to mention though about the score was that apparently, in terms of composing this, Alwyn and Carol Reed, they actually sat down, and Alwyn was like at a piano and Carol Reed would sort of act out some of the action that was happening. And that was how they kind of figured out the pacing for the score. And then whenever it came time to actually shoot things, most of the scenes apparently were shot to pre-recordings of not the fully fleshed out version of the score. And then he went back later and orchestrated all of that stuff. And Alwyn worked very closely with the editor so that the sound and the music were integrated. And I think maybe that's also part of the reason why it doesn't leap out at you as much, because as you were alluding to before, some of the sound, I don't want to say sound effects, but the sort of ambient noises and things like that, they made sure to integrate those things together well. And so it has maybe more of a seamless sort of quality to it that it might not have otherwise.
Yeah, and actually a very strange thing, this is very unusual, but Carol Reed would have his music guy and his editor during production on the set. Very few people did that. Just so they would be watching. I guess he wanted them to see the filming as it was going along. Most of the times these people only saw the film after the fact. It's a really unusual thing that he did there. But I think maybe, again, it helps to tie everything nicely together. So on to the cinematographer, Robert Krasker. Yeah. Great cinematographer. This fellow, he was Australian, Robert Krasker. At one point, he immigrated to, and he was living in, I don't know if he immigrated to, but he was living in Germany for a period of time. And that's where he picked up this sort of German expressionism style. He started off as a photographer, and he sort of moved into film photography and being a cameraman, etc. But again, he picked up this German expressionism, and that's sort of what he did for the rest of his career. He was very into the German expressionist type style of shooting, which is a lot of black and white angles, contrasts, using elements like shadows, like mist, like smoke, those sort of things. He also did The Third Man with Carol Reed, and he did win an Oscar for his work on The Third Man. He also did Brief Encounter with David Lean. So a really great cinematographer, and I'm going to get back into the cinematography in a bit, but I wanted to start talking a little bit about the plot.
Sure, yeah.
One thing I really like, and I had to go back and rewatch this, because one thing I love about this film is that it does a thing that is very common with David Lean that I really like, where the beginning scene and the ending scene are the same. Right. The clock. I mean, it's not really the beginning scene because they have that overhead shot of the whole village, I suppose.
Yes.
And those words that come up. So, I mean, it's not technically the very first thing you see, but it's the first part of the movie. They show this clock that looks kind of like Big Ben. I guess there's a lot of these big clocks in Britain. I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't recall off the top of my head the specific name of that clock, but apparently the clock that they show in that film is like a recreation of it that they did at the studio in England as opposed to on location in Belfast.
Yeah, they did actually shoot a lot on location, but they did also shoot some in the studio. But so you start out with the clock, and the reason I wanted to go back and look at this clock again is because as the film is going through, I kept thinking, how much time is passing? Is this a day? Is this 2 days? I mean, it's very hard to tell. So having the clock in the front and the end, I could go back and see that in the first shot, it says 4 o'clock. So I'm assuming the whole thing starts at 4 p.m. And that's when you see the IRA members. They never call them the IRA, though. No. They call them the organization.
Right. I think to some extent that was probably purposeful in a variety of ways. But one of the things that doing it that way kind of helps with is to make the story a little less sort of specific to you can pick up from the accents and whatnot that it's in Ireland and all of that, but even though they filmed it in Belfast, they never actually say that it's happening in Belfast, and so it in some way kind of gives it a little bit of a universal quality to it that it wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to avoid putting the political viewpoint in. I think that's very particular to avoid that. And it's interesting that you say about it being a universal type thing, because this story was done again in 1969 called The Lost Man, starring Sidney Poitier. And of course, it's not done in Ireland. It's not about the IRA. But so that's why it's sort of a universal type, as you said, it makes it more of a universal type thing. We start out in the beginning, and the guys are all in the room. They're in this house. I guess you call it a safe house or whatever.
Right.
And we find out that James Mason is the head of the gang. His name in the film,
Johnny McQueen.
Johnny McQueen. Johnny McQueen is the head of the organization. He says at one point, in this territory or in this district or something. So I'm guessing that it's meant to say this organization is far reaching and he just happens to be the head in this Belfast area, which again, they don't say Belfast, but it is supposed to be taking place in Belfast.
And I guess maybe for listeners who don't have the sort of history of all of this, so you had the partitioning of Ireland that happened in 1921 into sort of what eventually became the Republic of Ireland, which is kind of the majority of the land mass. And then you had Northern Ireland, which remained under English control, although it had sort of its own kind of local government, but it was still ultimately a part of the United Kingdom as opposed to a separate entity. And in the North, you had a Protestant majority and a very kind of vocal Catholic minority. And so that's where all of this sort of sectarian violence with the IRA and all of that comes into play.
Yeah, and what I looked through and I couldn't find this information unless I'm just looking in the wrong place. What year is this set in? I don't even know. It's supposed to be modern day for them at that time, 47?
Right. That would probably be my guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would have had to have been somewhere presumably between 1921 and 1947.
Well, they definitely are not dressed like it's 1920. They feel like they're dressed kind of modernly for 1946.
46, yeah.
So I don't know. That was just something I was looking. I'm like, what decade? What year is this?
I mean, I guess the other thing that probably narrows it down to when it was occurring is the fact that you see these shots of bombed out ruins in the city. I think there was even references to
air raid shelter.
Yeah, there's that, and like references to rationing that was still going on at that
That would have
point.
been World War II.
Right. Yeah. So, presumably it's in like 45, 46, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's helpful. They're very vague about a lot of things, maybe purposely, like you said. But yeah, you have to sort of be a little bit of a detective, figure things out on your own. So anyhow, we find out that they're all there. They're making this plan to do this heist on this mill to get some money for the organization. There's a young lady there.
Kathleen.
Is Kathleen. Her name in real life is also Kathleen.
Yeah. How convenient.
Yeah, Kathleen. So they're very nice to keep the same name. Makes it a lot easier when you're acting. You say Kathleen, you're like, oh, that's me.
Yeah, the James Mason should have played James McQueen
Johnny,
or something.
Yeah. But we find out that there's this elderly lady, this the grandmother, and this young girl that's Kathleen, and this organization is hanging out at their house because Johnny apparently has broken out of prison. He's been staying at their house for 6 months. That's sort of told as they're going along, and they're planning this heist. And there's some concern that Johnny is not going to be fit to do this job because he's been in jail and then he's been hiding out in this house. So they're worried about this, and they're also worried that Johnny is kind of losing his passion for the cause, which he claims he isn't, but you kind of see that he is becoming more of a pacifist. He's concerned about using the weapons.
Yeah, he mentions sort of that he no longer kind of feels that violence is the way to achieve it. He says something about
Parliament,
exactly.
Yeah, you can see he thinks that they should fight this battle in Parliament, get political allies and stuff like that. Yeah. So anyhow, he says, absolutely not, I'm the leader, it doesn't matter. And even Kathleen, we find out, of course, Kathleen is in love with him. Yeah. She doesn't want him to go either. She's worried about him, whatever. But he ignores everybody, especially women. You know how men just ignore women when they have the bright idea and they do things wrong. But that's okay. That's okay. So they go off to this little heist and they have it all nicely planned out. And it's going to plan at first, but then I don't know. I find this really isn't funny, but it is kind of funny to me. They go get all the money. They get out of the mill. As soon as they start to leave the mill, the alarm starts ringing, right?
Right.
So they're dashing out. They're all dashing into the getaway car, and Johnny comes out, and suddenly he can't see. The sun is blinding him, or some such thing is happening.
And it's like his vision kind of gets
distorted.
Blurry. Yeah.
Again, this is Robert Krasker doing something to make everything look distorted to him. He does this numerous times in the film.
It happened even on the way to the mill.
That's true. When he's looking out from the car. So obviously, because he's been in jail and a house for 6 months, he can't stand the sun or something. I don't know. But anyhow, he gets blinded by the sun.
Yeah, I didn't know if he was maybe having some sort of like a flashback
or something. It's not
or
really clear why he can't just normally walk out of the building, but he can't.
And even doesn't the shot kind of like get just like
a little
the angle and all?
It sort of like tilts. Yeah. And so as he's sitting there not getting in the car because he's having the spell, a fellow comes out with a gun and says, "Who are you?" Which I think is the strangest thing you would ask at that time. Like, why ask that? But anyhow, he asked, "Who are you?" And then they get into a tussle, and he winds up shooting Johnny in the left shoulder, or the left arm, or something like that. And then Johnny winds up getting out his gun and shooting him. And at the time, he's just shot. We don't know anything further about it. And he tries to get in the car. They're all getting in the car. He can't get completely in the car again. Not really sure why he can't get in the car.
Yeah, they have a really hard time.
Yeah,
like
he can't
trying
get in
to
the car.
pull.
For some reason, they can't pull him in the car. It's very complicated. And then this driver is just like, "We got to go." And he's dashing around these corners. And of course, he flings Johnny off the car.
Yeah.
He falls in the road. And then they're saying, back up, go get him. And for some reason, he refuses to back up too, which I'm not understanding.
Yeah, they waste a bunch of time at that point,
there.
like trying to
sitting there when they
figure out who's going to do
backed
what.
up and grabbed him and gone on, and they would have had less time there, but they're all just sitting there arguing.
One thing that's interesting about the point where he shoots that gentleman is that it's actually different than how it happens in the book. So in the book, Johnny shoots first, whereas in the film, Johnny doesn't shoot until after he has already been shot.
He's
So it's more of a defense.
Defending himself. Okay. So we're making him, I think they're trying in a way to make him more sympathetic as well.
Because the book really is very anti-IRA, and the organization in it is much more sort of violent and has no kind of redeeming sort of, you don't feel any sort of connection to them in the way that you kind of do in this film.
Yeah, and so also I would mention there's a lot of really nice camera work in that getaway scene, really building the tension. Again, I imagine the music was probably doing it too, but I felt like the tension was really built more through the cinematography. Yeah. They're showing close-ups of the guys' faces, and then they're showing them these angles and the pavement and all this stuff. It's really well done. It really makes you feel anxious and nervous. You kind of get that panic feeling that they have just from the cinematography, which is very beautiful. So what winds up happening is they are dilly-dallying around too long, and for some reason a dog comes after him, and he starts running away from the dog. And instead of going up the next street like they expect him to, he just goes behind in all these back gardens or something. And they're saying, well, we'll just catch up with him at the hideout.
Right.
I don't know how they figure that he's going to get to the hideout, which is apparently a million miles away as you watch this film. The hideout has to be like, I don't know where the hideout is in comparison to where he is, but it seems like it's very, very far. He cannot possibly get there.
It's like they're trying to get to Mordor or something. It's this epic quest.
It's very strange, but especially since, anyhow, so they go off and leave him. He winds up finding, like we said, this air raid shelter, and he sort of goes in there and just chills out. And they go back to the house without him. They're in this big fight, this big argument about it. And then Dennis, who was the fellow, I guess maybe he's like the second guy. He seems to be like sort of the second guy in charge. It doesn't really say.
Lieutenant or consigliere kind of.
It doesn't really say, but he seems to be like the closest to Johnny in the film. He decides he's going to go out and try to find him, which again, I guess it can't be that far because he walks around the city to get him. I don't know. It's very confusing. Yeah. But anyhow, he goes out to look for him, and he sends the other three guys that had been in the getaway car off to the headquarters, wherever that may be. It's very vague. A lot of the stuff is very vague, but maybe it's meant to be vague to keep you sort of, I don't know. And then he winds up eventually running into a group of children, which I thought the group of children was really interesting. Actually, they said the children in the film were...
They were orphans.
They were actually from St. Patrick's Boys' Home in Belfast. They actually got children from there.
And I found an article, and it said that the children, a number of them were orphaned because their parents had been killed in the Blitz during World War II when the Nazis bombed Belfast.
Well, the nice thing is that you get his authenticity, the nuance, because these children have this definite Belfast accent. They sound proper to the location, and the kids are very good, I think.
And you mentioned about the accent. They are among the few characters in the film that do actually have an authentic Ulster accent. Them and the handsome cab driver, because he was also like a local actor. A lot of the other actors have sort of a more generic kind of Irish accent, which the average like American viewer isn't going to know that, but folks in the UK would have been more likely to.
Yeah, well, Carol Reed, he sort of impressed upon them that he wanted them to acquire that northern accent. As a matter of fact, the fellow that plays the getaway driver, his character's name is Pat. His real name is Cyril Cusack. They said he did the best job of actually doing that Northern Irish accent. He did a really good job of that. And a lot of these Irish actors are from the Abbey Theatre. That was the big, important theatre, the main theatre in all of Ireland. If you were anybody, you were in that theater. So that's right away where Carol Reed, he knew he needed a bunch of Irish actors. And he said, I'm going to go get them from the Abbey Theater, because he knew that was the place to get Irish actors. And again, he knew the accent wouldn't be the same as the Northern accent, but he thought that they were capable, because they were so good, of getting that Northern Irish accent. Now, James Mason, on the other hand, not from the Abbey Theatre, kind of got him because he was somewhat of a premier actor in England at the time. He wanted a box office appeal. James Mason wasn't a huge breakout star at that point. He was kind of big in Britain. He was trying to make his way to America. That was his plan. And he was looking for a breakout role in Britain that would sort of catch the attention of American and Hollywood. And this actually came to be it, actually. So he did succeed, but he knew he had to work with a better British director than he had been working with. And he thought he knew the premier directors. One of them was Carol Reed. So when he got asked for this particular film, he was more than happy to do it.
And he wasn't the one they originally asked to do the role, right?
No, because they, unfortunately for Stuart Granger, he was actually asked to do this role as well. Again, another very, at the time, kind of popular British actor. But he looked at the script, didn't bother to read the stage directions, just flipping through the dialogue, said, hey, this character has no dialogue. Why do I want to do this? And then he obviously wound up kicking himself when he saw the film and realized this sort of launched James Mason's career. And James Mason and Stuart Granger didn't really have the same kind of careers.
Yeah, their trajectory is very different.
Quite different,
Yeah.
yes. Did you know that Stuart Granger, off topic, did you know that Stuart Granger was actually named born Jimmy Stewart? And he couldn't use that name, of course, because of Jimmy Stewart.
Which I am from Indiana, Pennsylvania, so I appreciate Jimmy Stewart.
He actually,
hometown hero.
Yeah, he actually called up Jimmy Stewart and said, "Is that your real name?" And he said, "Yeah, actually it is." He said, "Okay." He said, "Well, because it's my real name, and I wouldn't appreciate it if you were, using a name that." So he had to change his name to Stuart Granger.
That's like in music, David Bowie. His real name is David Jones, but Davy Jones from the Monkees was already successful, so he picked a different name.
Yeah. Well, Stuart Granger sounds nicer than Jimmy Stewart, actually.
Yeah, it does sound much more sort of majestic.
Yes. So anyhow, I forget where we were at now. So we were at, so Dennis is off to look for Johnny.
Right.
And these little children are there, and he sees this little girl sitting there by herself. She has one roller skate, only one, not the second roller skate. But we see earlier in the film, she has been to the air raid shelter because a ball got knocked in there and she was chasing the ball, and she did see Johnny sitting there in the air raid shelter. He also has a delusion at that point, which again, beautifully done by Robert Krasker.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just the way he lights that guard or the police officer.
Yeah.
James Mason thinks he's speaking to this guard at his jail. He thinks he's back in his jail cell. He's in a delirium because of maybe losing blood, or I'm not really sure why
maybe
he's in
shock
maybe
from
the bullet. He's in some delirium.
But even the way that some of those shots are done, it's kind of similar to earlier on when he's having, whatever.
Yes, he seems to be all messed up for no apparent reason.
So I don't know if it's something that was happening to him even before he was wounded or what. But
so he thinks he's talking to this guard in a jail cell, and he winds up finding out that he's actually talking to this little girl that's just sitting there staring at him like he's insane, and then she runs away. So Dennis winds up seeing this little girl sitting there, and he thinks maybe she has some information, and she winds up telling him where Johnny is. And in the meantime, the other guys are trying to get to the organization headquarters.
Right.
But there are police all over the streets, and they keep asking everybody for their identification. Now, why these guys don't have any identification at all, I'm not 100% sure. You'd think they'd have some documentation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like they have documentation that says we're with the IRA.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really confused at that point, to be honest. But
maybe the police have like a list of like all the members of the.
You think if they're part of the organization, they could get false.
Yeah, exactly.
IDs?
Yeah,
I don't know. Well,
I mean, if teenagers can get a fake ID.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what kind of this organization seems rather shoddy, but anyhow.
And especially, today licenses have all these sort of
holograms.
Yeah, things built in them to make them difficult to fake, but they surely wouldn't have been complicated back in the 40s.
I was really confused by why they didn't have any identification. But anyhow, so they have to keep avoiding the police because they obviously don't have identification. And the one fellow, Pat, again, this is that same guy, the driver. This guy's kind of causing all the problems, in my opinion. But Pat decides, we'll go around to Teresa's house. Teresa seems to be some proprietor of some type of maybe house of ill repute.
Yeah, they don't really say
sure.
specifically what.
They call her a money lender. I'm not really sure what they mean by that.
or she has like an illegal gambling operation.
She's definitely running something illegal. She's doing something illegal. That's all we know. And the funny thing about Teresa is she's played by Maureen Delaney, who is the wife of F.J. McCormick, who plays Shell, who we'll talk about later, who was really good, probably one of my favorite characters in the film. But anyhow, they go to her. They think she's going to give them some alcohol and some food, and they can sort of wait things out at her house. But instead, she takes the opportunity to call the police and turn them in. And why I also think she's running an illegal operation of some sort is because she sort of says, I'm helping you out now, as if to say, lay off of me. That's the impression I get.
Right.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's the impression I got from it. So the police wind up coming and shooting these two boys and killing them. Well, they could have arrested them, but Pat immediately starts firing.
Yeah.
So they have to shoot them.
Seemed really, like you said, kind of the cause of all of their
I
problems.
I feel like Pat is
too much of a hothead.
Yeah, I don't like that Pat.
Yeah.
He's not a fan of his. So all that stuff is going on, and then Dennis finally gets to Johnny.
Yeah.
And he says, you have to go to the house. You have to go to the house. And he's going to go create a diversion. He's got a bandage on his hand. He wants people to think he's Johnny. He's going to lead the police away and let Johnny get back to the house, which apparently Johnny cannot walk. He's injured in the arm, but maybe he's lost a lot of blood. Throughout the whole time, like, he just really can't move very well. So he's trying to, Dennis does succeed in getting the police away. And he's trying to get to the house, but he can't seem to ever find his way to the house. I don't know if he just doesn't know where it is or...
well, and especially if he's having all of these sorts
I
of
think
delusions and things.
He's like disoriented.
Yeah.
He's lost blood. He's confused. Apparently the house is very far away, although Dennis managed to walk from wherever he was.
From where to find Johnny.
Yeah, but whatever happens, he cannot get to this house.
And that segment where Dennis is leaving to create the diversion has like one of my favorite shots from that whole film. He's going down an alley and you see him from behind, and it very much reminds me of a shot in The Third Man with Orson Welles in the sewer.
Yeah, there's a lot of shots that are very similar to what you're going to see in The Third Man later on. This running down these passages, the cobblestone wet pavements.
Right.
Like, this is a Carol Reed trademark, in my opinion, or maybe a Robert Krasker trademark. Who knows? But Carol Reed was the one that always wanted the pavements wet. So going through these sort of passageways a lot with the big shadow on the wall. This is very common in The Third Man, and it's really well done here. Done first here. Right. So it's, again, credit Robert Krasker with there's just some beautiful shots. This is visually beautiful film, even if you don't really hear much of the score. I'm really bitter about that score. But anyhow, so Johnny doesn't get to where he has to go at all. This is going to be a theme that continues to go all through the film. But sadly, Dennis winds up getting arrested because they catch him trying to shove. He was away, too. He had been gotten away. And he was shoving some bandages, stopped to shove some bandages down a gutter or drain, and they found him and caught him. And luckily wasn't killed. They
at least he didn't get shot.
Him.
Yeah.
He tried to escape on a little trolley or something, and they came and got him. But
Johnny is found by these two women that are like sort of
Oh, yes, that's right. Because Johnny's trying to slowly creep around through the cities. And luckily, wherever Johnny is, the policemen aren't. So I've noticed that. They're everywhere else in the entire city, but wherever he is, they're not. And you're right. He's walking down the street. A bus comes by, or a truck. I guess they call it a lorry.
A lorry,
Lorry, this is British terminology. A lorry comes by, and it doesn't hit him, but it sort of is close to him, and he falls down. And these two ladies come out. They think he's been hit by the lorry.
Right.
They bring him into the house. And this is going to be the beginning. I don't know if this is the beginning, but there's a whole theme here about people that don't want to get involved. There seems to be the common theme with all the regular townspeople that they're afraid both of the organization and the police.
Right.
So they're in this position where they don't want to have anything to do with it because either way they do something, they're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, it's almost like a mafia film kind of thing.
It is.
Yeah.
It's much more like a mafia than terrorists.
Yeah. But the other thing about sort of that approach to the film, this very easily could have just been like a fugitive caper kind of film, like the fugitive being chased by the police and all of that. But instead of taking that sort of approach of like following all of that action, it's much more about how do all of these people react
Yeah.
to him? And when they're faced with this kind of decision about, do I turn him in? Do I help him get back to his friends? They sort of struggle with that. So it almost becomes more of like a character study than a fugitive caper kind of film.
Yeah, absolutely. The film is about people not knowing what to do or trying to do the right thing or being,
Yeah,
it's about
they're having like kind of like a
dilemmas.
moral dilemma.
Yes,
Yeah.
the film is about moral dilemmas throughout.
Yeah.
So that's what you will keep running into throughout the film. These people want to help him because they feel sorry for him or they're afraid of the organization, but they're also too afraid of the police. And this is the case with these two ladies that take him in. Once they figure out who he is, they don't know what to do because they don't want to just put him out on the street and have him die. They're compassionate towards him, but they also don't want to deal, again, with the police.
And especially the husband of one of them comes home and he really definitely doesn't seem to want to have this.
Yeah, they just don't want to have
Fugitive
this problem. They don't want to have this problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then they have to make a decision that's affecting them one way or the other.
Yeah.
So he winds up somehow getting up and leaving again, and then he sort of hails a ride in the back of a cab unknowingly to the cab driver.
Yeah, exactly.
And he winds up getting somewhere further away or closer. I don't know where he is in relation to the actual safe house again.
But he at least sort of makes it through the police cordon that they've
Yes.
kind of.
He gets away from the police. And as a matter of fact, it's actually a very funny part in the film because the cab driver is completely unaware that somebody's even in the cab. And the police say, "Who you got in the back of your cab?" And he says, "Johnny."
Yeah.
And he does have Johnny, but he doesn't know it. And the police think he's making a funny joke and they're like, "Oh, go ahead."
Yeah.
And then later on, when he tries to pick up a fare, he realizes there is somebody and he realizes who it is. Again, the same issue. Every character you're going to see that comes in contact with Johnny is going to have the same exact problem. So he winds up putting him in this courtyard thing with all these different pieces of furniture.
It's sort of the like ruins of the city.
Yeah, it's very odd. It looks like he puts him in like an old bathtub. That's what it looks like.
And he even says something to the effect of like, "I'm neither for nor against you," kind of thing.
Well, he
like,
says, if you get back to your friends, let them know that I helped you. But if the police get you, you've never heard of me.
Exactly.
So that sort of thing. And then we get introduced to, in my opinion, probably one of the best actors in the film, which is Shell. Because as soon as this guy goes back out of his car, there's this little man standing there. He says, "I saw what you did."
Right.
Yeah, this guy is great. F.J. McCormick, a very, very popular actor at this Abbey Theatre, was in 500 performances, probably one of the premier actors of Ireland.
Yeah.
Very, very good in this film. As a matter of fact, so good in this film that many people think he steals the film. He just plays this sort of little sort of sneaky old man, but not very smart. What I think is really interesting with him is his dialogue. Everything he uses is bird references when he's talking about things. It's a lot of metaphors he's talking the whole time. It's very interesting. And when he winds up going and talking to Father Tom, who's now also introduced, another great Abbey actor. He actually was one of the founders of the Abbey Theatre. His name is F.G. Fay. They all have initials. F.G. Fay, one of the...
Nobody wants their first names to be known by anybody.
One of the founders of the Abbey Theatre, and he plays Father Tom. And there's a great scene with him and Shell, sort of fencing in a way. I mean, they're not literally fencing, verbally fencing.
Right.
Father Tom has the measure of this guy, and this guy's looking for money to help Johnny, and Father Tom is... What would you say he's even doing? He's negotiating with him. He doesn't understand the negotiations.
Yeah, he's kind of challenging him.
He tells him, "I'm going to give you the most precious thing, a bit of faith." And Shell is not clear what he means, but he hears the word precious and thinks it relates.
Yeah.
And he'll later on go and ask other people, "What is this thing, faith?" And there's a very touching scene between him and this fellow Tober where he asks about faith. And I think it's a very meaningful conversation there. But anyhow, at this point, Kathleen has also gotten to Father Tom. She's looking for Johnny. She finds out that this Shell knows where Johnny is. She gets really angry. She wants to know where he is. But Father Tom manages to get him to agree to terms, which is basically no terms at all. But he doesn't understand that. And so he runs back to go find Johnny. But in the meantime, he gets waylaid by this fellow he lives with, Lukey, who is played by Robert Newton. And I will tell you right now that I could live without the Robert Newton character. And I'm a big fan of Robert Newton, but I hate that character in the film. I think it's a blight on the film, to be honest.
Yeah, he really kind of overacts. In that film. And I think that's maybe part of the issue with having all of these theater actors in the film is that they act more theatrical than...
Except Robert Newton is a film actor, not a theater actor.
Right.
So you're not, that's not the case with Robert Newton. I didn't think the theater actors were theatrical. I thought they played very well. But I did think that Robert Newton overacted terribly.
He does.
I feel like Robert Newton had gotten to a point in his career where he was a severe alcoholic, He did some beautiful performances in David Lean films, This Happy Breed, and also Oliver Twist. But he wound up playing characters like Treasure Island, these pirates and stuff. And I think he just got into this sort of overacting mode. But to me, he is just horrible in this film. And he was widely criticized for this. And also, he made no attempt at an Irish accent. He sounded quite British.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And it's just this character seems superfluous. Do we even need to have this character in the film? I feel like it kind of messes up the film.
Yeah, the character that he plays is this sort of eccentric artist.
Yeah.
And I think he just took that idea and ran a little too far with it.
Yeah, no, it's just everything's so realistic and naturalistic, and then you have this guy, and it just kind of grates. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the film.
Yeah.
It's really irritating. But anyhow, he gets waylaid by Lukey, and he's trying to paint Shell. He's trying to paint everybody. And at this point, Johnny manages to get up. He revives. He keeps having these little periods where he revives briefly and walks around for a bit. And he gets himself into this saloon, which is called the Crown Bar, which is an actual bar in Belfast. However, this was done on a set. They recreated this thing to look almost exactly like this bar.
And so now you have tourists who go
they think
they think that the bar in Belfast is actually like where this was filmed, but it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like this fellow, the barman named Fancy. He had previously worked with Carol Reed in The Way Ahead. His name was William Hartnell, and he did have a pretty long career. I thought he did a really nice job. I thought he was very believable as a barman, and he's dealing with having Johnny goes into these little private booths, I guess, that have a door, and Johnny goes in there and he's all upset again. He's got the same issue that everybody else has. He's in the same predicament. And what I really like in this particular scene is when Johnny spills the beer on the bar and he sees the little faces in the bubbles. I thought that was really well done. Again, I think we have to credit Robert Krasker. That's a really cool scene. I don't know how he did that, particularly at that
especially
that period of time.
Exactly.
But it's beautifully done. A lot of credit to Robert Krasker. Anyhow, eventually what winds up happening is Lukey and Shell both wind up at the same bar by a coincidence, and they get into this horrible fight, and then Fancy convinces Lukey to deal with Johnny and get rid of him, and he takes him to his apartment or his loft or whatever it is. And this fellow that lives with him as well, Tober, this is the fellow I was talking about earlier, is played by Elwyn Brooks Jones. He's the one that has that very meaningful conversation with Shell about faith. This part of the film, there's a lot of very meaningful expressions of religion, I think.
Yes.
Because at one point, Johnny, again, he's suffering one of those delusions. And this, again, really well done by Robert Krasker. All the paintings are magically coming off the wall, and they're sort of sitting there like school children. And then Father Tom is this ghostly image in between. And again, really well done. And Johnny has this revelation, this religious revelation. He gives this big, wonderful, very dramatic monologue. And it's a really touching part of the film to me. Even though Lukey's in it and he's being annoying, but it's still, the parts with Tober and Shell and him having this revelation are really beautiful. Tober manages to sort of patch him up. He apparently had some medical school training. Yeah. And then they're going to send him off again. We're getting really close to the end of the film, and we don't do spoilers here, but the end is, to me, the perfect ending. Which is not actually the perfect ending would have been the way Carol Reed originally wanted it, but the censors made him do it this other way. But still, it's the way it should end, in my opinion. And again, at the very end, you end with the shot of the clock. Thank goodness you do, because it tells you the clock says 12 o'clock.
Right.
So now you know that this whole thing has happened between 4 and 12.
Yeah.
And like I said, I love the continuity of starting and ending, going full circle with the story. It's one of my favorite things when people do that. What are your thoughts? I will mention that this is Roman Polanski's favorite film. Said he loved this film more than any film ever. And
it was also a favorite of Sam Peckinpah as well.
Yeah. Do you have any other particular thoughts you want to say on this particular film?
Yeah. So, I mean, this film at the time was very highly regarded. Like a lot of
it was well
folks,
received.
Said it was a masterpiece. And most of the articles that I found about it from that time period really raved about it. But there were occasional reviews that were a little less flattering, mostly because they thought that the American audiences wouldn't find it entertaining enough, because it's very kind of down and
Yeah,
gritty
because the
and all
American
of that.
audiences had never seen a film noir. Like,
Well, yeah,
hello?
I don't know, but I found, and really, I mean, ultimately, that's an indictment of the audiences rather than the film itself. And I found this, what I thought was kind of a great little blurb about it in The Hollywood Reporter. So R.W. Wilkerson said, quote, "It's not a good story for the customers who run to our theaters for their entertainment and relaxation. It's depressing and it's arty grim. There's nothing in the yarn that wins audience support. There's nothing in the story that a ticket buyer can tie into and root for during the running of the picture, a most necessary ingredient of film entertainment. However, this picture proves above anything he has done yet that Mr. Carroll Reed is one of the most important directors in the picture world. His handling of this story most certainly elevated it from what could have easily been a cops and robbers program fare into an exceedingly interesting, at times entrancing, and thrilling bit of screen presentation that will be appreciated more by our picture creators and their highly intelligent ticket buyers than by the bulk of our picture audiences." And then he goes on to say that he thinks it won't be a box office success in the U.S. no matter how excellent the film is because it's not an audience picture. So
I believe it was a box office success in America. And also, he was also told by other people that it was too arty, studio executives, which is ridiculous. I think he was told that by Rank. And I did want to mention, one thing I almost forgot to mention is that another thing Krasker did was they shot James Mason at a lot of low angles to give him the dignity of a political orator a political monument. And you do kind of notice that through the film to try to not keep him sympathetic, but keep him as something people wanted to maybe root for in a way, or to keep him from being a complete villain, I suppose, which he doesn't play it in a villainous way. And I think it's very poignant the way he keeps asking, did I kill that man? Did I kill that man? And nobody will tell him. He did actually kill the man in the film. So, but he is obviously concerned that he did. That's one of the things that we didn't mention either. So what we would like to do here is give our star ratings, and I will start with you since you are our guest, Bryan. What is your star rating? 1 out of 5, 5 being the best, 1 being obviously the worst?
I would give this one a 4.5, only because I think The Third Man is better than Odd Man Out, but just that little bit of difference.
Yeah, The Third Man is better. He perfected his craft by then. This is very perfect too, but it's even more perfected than The Third Man. I will give this also a 4.5. I was tempted to give it a 4 because I really dislike Robert Newton and that character, and I really think it's unnecessary. But the cinematography is so great. The editing is really great. Carroll Reed's a great director. So yeah, 4.5. But anyhow, we are running over time here today, and I want to thank you, Bryan, again for being our guest. And don't forget to tune in for our next episode of Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's classic film review. It's going to be a great one, so stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And leave a review.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you again, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. It's been great.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And please leave us a comment or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Intro and outro music composed by Heidi Engel. Artwork by Tyler Birch. Produced and edited by Wendy Whittick. Recorded at PCTV Studios, Pittsburgh, PA. See you next time.